Yesterday we saw Timur Dyabov qualify for the final of the FIDE World Cup, and today we had the tiebreak in the other semi-final match between the two Chinese players, Yangyi and Liren. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the second rapid play game between these two players. Before we do that, remember to like, comment, share and subscribe. The button's down there. And if you want to support the channel, then do check out the links to PayPal or patreon.com PowerPlayChess. So here we go, this second rapid play game. The first game was drawn. Quite a tense encounter, but finished relatively quickly in an endgame. In the second game, Ding has the white pieces and Yu has played quite an adventurous move, bishop b4. Now this has been quite popular of late. You might recall that Anand has played this quite a lot. He played bishop e7 against Nepo, but we had a5 today from Yu, and this is also quite a popular system. So it seems odd that Black allows this knight into d5 with tempo, but Black's idea is that he's going to attack that knight or challenge it with his own knight, and in that way doesn't actually gain time. Even so, by this stage it feels as though white is doing okay. It's about to play d4 to hit the bishop, but after knight f6 actually things aren't so clear. d4 attacks the bishop. Now instead of taking, knight d5 is an important move. Now here white has a choice. You could grab the bishops like this. This was tested in Gelfand against Anand, Moscow 2018. But actually Black is all right here. You'll notice that in bringing this bishop out early, of course it helps Black's kingside development. The king castles early and, well, white is a little lagging, and that means that it's difficult for white to get control in the centre. But Ding captured the knight instead. So now an exchange in the middle. Bishop comes back to b6 and bishop g5. And this feels a little bit uncomfortable for Black because you don't want to play queen d7, which blocks the bishop. So f6, but yeah, feels a bit funny to play f6. In fact, Black is okay here because Black advances the f pawn and starts to perhaps get a little bit of initiative. Queen c2 puts some pressure on this diagonal and prevents f4, or discourages f4, let's say. And here previously we've seen h6 played between Cheparinov and Li, game played in China 2018. Now, I wonder if this is a Chinese speciality. Cheparinov actually castled on the king side here, but castling queen side is a very interesting move. In any case, Yu played knight d7 here, and Ding admitted afterwards that he was unfamiliar with this. He was out of his preparation by this point. Now this is a very interesting move, a very dynamic move from Yu, and he was obviously still in his preparation here because, well, he was playing relatively quickly. This is a pawn sacrifice. Ding took the pawn. And then knight f6. So Black can get away with this because white has yet to castle. So Black is kind of embarking on the middle game, whereas white needs to spend a move getting his king to some kind of safety. So for example, after bishop takes bishop, well, Black should be able to collect that pawn. For example, if white protects the pawn, then we've got queen f5. So Black is absolutely fine there. And it is difficult for white to keep his extra pawn. Bishop came back, so at least maintains some pressure on this diagonal. So before capturing, black should play h6. So this is the game continuation. And once again, let's have a look at what happens if white simply protects that pawn in the middle. Well, after queen e8, black has a lot of play on the king side. Queen's going to come to a beautiful square on h5, which could bring some pressure to bear on the king side, but also looks across at the d pawn. So, well, black should be fine in that position. So h6 has just been played. Now, instead of protecting that pawn, Ding looked to exploit the weaknesses here on the king side on g6. You took the d pawn back, which is a remarkable decision because it simply allows white to take an exchange. And I'm sure this was part of Yu's preparation, which is pretty remarkable because we're quite deep into the game by this point. So we've got a double discovered check here. The king goes back. And now, you know, this is very tricky because you would have had to have worked out that queen h7 check isn't actually winning here. I should say Ding played knight g6. Let's just have a quick look at queen h7. Here, if black captures the knight, then white is winning after this. You can take pawns and then queen g8 check and you hit the knight. But after queen h7 check, this is very tricky. King f7 is actually winning for black because that knight is trapped. So for example, knight g6, bishop f5. So you just want to take this, and if knight e5 check, be careful here, but actually king f6 is winning for black, which is a remarkable position actually. Okay, let's go back. So instead of this adventure with queen h7, knight g6, which means that white is a whole exchange up here, but suddenly black's pieces come into the game and black's minor pieces are superb in this position. Well, already there's some kind of threat here, bishop f5. So queen e4, attacking the knight, and then bishop e6 protects the knight. White castle. So white keeps this extra exchange, but black has such piece activity here. It has superb compensation. All black's minor pieces stand very well. That knight obviously can't be driven away from this beautiful central square. And this knight is very odd. Needs to find its way back into the position. And this bishop, not a good piece. Just, well, it's a big pawn at the moment. Blocked in by the pawn on d4. Now, one way to bring that knight back into the middle would be to play knight f4. But Ding obviously didn't want to give up material. He would lose that centre pawn. And black's bishops are very good here. So black would have a bishop and a pawn against a rook. And a very compact position. It's hard for white to find a kind of chink in black's armour here. So I can understand why Ding didn't want to do that. Although I would say that's a relatively safe way to go in that it does exchange pieces. But instead Ding played knight h4. Now that's much more ambitious because although white is keeping all his pawns, that knight is not beautifully placed on h4. Even if it comes back to f3, it's not really achieving very much there. So bishop f7 attacks white's queen. Queen g4. Now, if you wanted to make a draw, then he could perhaps go for this this offers white the chance to repeat the position. But it's possible to avoid that with queen g3. Now, black still has compensation here, let's say a4. And I think that's certainly a reasonable way for black to play. But instead of that, instead of playing bishop e6, you also played very ambitiously with h5. And I have to say, I mean, I'm not sure about that move. Basically because it gives white something to play for here. It gives white a square. Here Ding played bishop g5. It is possible to play knight f3 here. Now there's an amusing draw. Let me just show you quite a nice line. Black has a big initiative here. You know, this is very dangerous with the queen sort of, you know, trapped at the side of the board. I can understand why Ding didn't want to go in for this. In fact, after this, it should be a draw. Just watch this. Queen takes knight, and then queen e8 check. So if the queen comes back, you can take the bishop with check. Otherwise, the king comes up, and this is a draw by perpetual check. Obviously, white's queen doesn't have time to take this because of the mate. So yeah, a draw by this mechanism on this diagonal. It's a funny line, but I think it kind of shows that chances, objectively, we can say chances are balanced. In a practical game, well, all bets are off in this position, of course. Forget what the computers are saying here. It's all about the initiative. It's all about activity. And as I said, when you played this move h5, I started to think, now somehow white gets a toehold for his pieces here. The computers like queen d4 here, and they assess this position as possibly even better for black. After h3, now I'm looking at this with human eyes, and I've got to say, I wouldn't feel bad with white in this position. It seems to me that white has security for his pieces now, and the possibility to maybe exchange off rooks here at some moment, or just hassle the queen somehow, maybe bring the knight into f5. I wouldn't mind white's position there. You, instead of taking the d-pawn, played queen e6. So that does keep an eye on this knight, keeps an eye on the f5 square. h3 covers g4 and gives the king an escape square. So again, it feels as though over the past couple of moves, things have turned a little bit in white's favour. But bishop takes pawn, that grabs a pawn back for black. And that's another pawn, so what's the score? So it's now bishop and 2 pawns for a rook, so material is now balanced. Having said that, there are several loose pieces in black's position now. And here I think, you know, there are a number of interesting possibilities that white has here. Bishop d2 was played by Ding, which is interesting. There's also bishop c1, which, well, offers some exchanges and also vacates the g5 square for the knight. There's also rook fe1 to exchange off rooks, also an interesting possibility. Anyway, bishop d2. And in practical terms, it feels as though this is much more difficult for black to play than white now, because white's forces have some harmony. The g5 square is available, whereas black's pieces are kind of a little bit scattered, and you know, I would always be thinking about that g5 square with the knight landing there. Queen f6 keeps a hold of the bishop. Obviously the rook's protection was blocked after bishop d2. Bishop takes a5. Now, if black wanted to kind of keep things a little bit together, then b6 and bishop c3 was possible. I still prefer white there, but you know, that's reasonable. But you played knight f4. Also okay, actually, but somehow there's a lot going on in this position. And if something's going to happen, then I think it might happen to black rather than white. Rook c2. Threatening knight e2 check, of course, so king h2. White's king very secure here, actually. Now this is a big moment. What happens on rook takes bishop? Well, we've got rook takes here. Material is now even, but white is better. Because these pawns are a little bit loose. The g5 square is available. I think white's king is safer than black's. An interesting move is knight takes g2. And then rook takes bishop. And here, well, again, I think all bets are off. There's a material balance, bishop and 2 against a rook. But white's forces are very active. White's king perhaps isn't as secure as it was, but still it's reasonable with the queen and knight round it. Very unclear. Instead of that, you played h4. I should mention that by this stage, he was really short on time. He was down to his last few seconds actually, and just playing on the increments. So they get 10 seconds each time they made a move. But Ding had more time, and he was somehow more cool in this situation. After queen g5, black is suffering. The best he can do is play the bishop down here, and well, white can give back the exchange and take on h4. You can see all black's pawns are split, and white has an extra pawn. It's better for white. Instead, the game went rook takes bishop, and this is just winning for white. If that rook is taken, check picks up the rook here. And instead, you just traded down into an endgame where he's just an exchange down, and this is completely lost. Absolutely no compensation now. Mate was even threatened on e8, but you can see black's pieces are just loose here. So it's actually a pretty simple job for Ding to clear up, which he did very efficiently. If b5, then, well, the tactics are now working in white's favour. You can see that g5 square, very nice for the knight. So knight fork. Okay, let's come back here. So after rook c2, threatening the bishop, this was played. But, well, these moves are not terribly difficult. Mate threatened on c8, and Ding collected another pawn. And with that one, well, that was the final move of the game. Utterly hopeless position, and you resigned. Well, I feel sorry for you, Yangyi. You know, he's played a fantastic tournament, and personally, I'd have loved to have seen him qualify for the candidates. We would have had 2 Chinese players in the candidates, but now, well, I'm a big fan of Ding as well. He goes through to the final, and obviously with it, a place in the candidates. In fact, he already had a place in the candidates, as he would have qualified on rating anyway. But, well, lots of complications with who qualifies for the candidates and who doesn't, but it's looking better for Anish Giri, who will probably qualify through his rating. Thanks for watching. Let's see what happens in the final between Ding Liren and Timur Ratyapov.